about working with clay is how mistakes can so easily be mushed up and the material reworked into what you had in mind. If only we humans could be so pliable. Or perhaps we are, viewed from the lens of the enormous trauma that was the experience of Judah during the time of Jeremiah. Jeremiah's prophecies enable a people to recall all that trauma, make sense of it, find words for that experience that has left them numb, wordless, lacking in trust, faith, and hope, violently and rather distinctly separated from their God, to make sense of all of that and then literally be reformed into that tradition that became the Israel faith that we received at the time of Jesus. Now let's put all this into some context. Before Jeremiah was called, that large kingdom that was King David's had already been separated, and the northern kingdom under the name of Israel had been taken over by the Assyrian Empire. During that time, Judah, the southern kingdom in which Jerusalem exists, had also been invaded and left in some wreckage. The Assyrian Empire now imposing heavy taxation and tribute, which devastated the economy. Now, during Jeremiah's time, as the kingdom of Assyria weakened and weakened, Judah started facing threats from Egypt in the south, and then eventually from Babylonia, which defeated Egypt and then became the dominant power. There were 3 invasions during the time of Jeremiah. In 597 BCE, when Babylonia attacked Jerusalem, deported the king and all of the prominent citizens and sent them way off into the far regions of the Assyrian kingdom, which was then part of Babylonia. Then a decade later, there was a second invasion when Babylonia incapacitated many of the outlying smaller towns and then blockaded Jerusalem, a blockade which lasted almost 2 years before the Babylonian army broke through. At that point, again, more of the prominent and wealthy and leading citizens were deported. And finally, in 582 BCE, in response to an uprising that was happening in Judah, again, Judah was invaded. Judah's people were dispersed in effect, many of them far, far away, and those that were still in the country were, in effect, under house arrest. They were not under control of their own country, and the conditions were very poor. For the average person, this was living with war and deprivation and forced resettlement for 2 to 3 generations. Now bring to mind what we know of the experience of the Ukraine right now, where the average person faces daily decisions about whether to stay or to go, where families have been separated from one another, where access to food is very precarious, where homes have been bombed and people needing to resettle within the country, or many fleeing the country altogether, where people wonder whether their family member who has gone to fight the war at the front will ever be seen again. If you recall and put into your mind that kind of image of what it felt like, that is exactly the experience of Judah for nearly 25 years straight. So they were people who had experienced the trauma of war, the wreckage of community, the cruelty of invading armies, the precariousness of daily living, all the damage, blood, and gore of war. This is the experience of the people to whom Jeremiah spoke, and for whom Jeremiah's writings became the essential voice that enabled the shaping of a future. Now, from the perspective of our summer lives, with plenty of delicious ice-filled drinks and cocktails, and boat rides and walks on the beach, Jeremiah's words can seem pretty harsh and depressing. And we kind of say that's not the part of the Bible we particularly like. But from the perspective of trauma, his words are life-giving, enabling a people to be reformed after their entire life has been smushed and smashed and devastated. We see two examples today of this offering that Jeremiah provides. First, that metaphor of broken family and the biographical story that provides a kind of parable for the Judeans. So let's take the first one first, which is that reading from the second chapter. Here Jeremiah offers this drama of broken family and divorce or legal proceedings. The family, an extended clan that was formed by the original covenant bonds, has God as the head of the household, but the covenant has been broken. And God names this first faithfulness in that retelling briefly of the story of freeing the people from Egypt, and then moves on to accuse, quite literally, the people of unfaithfulness once they have landed there in this promised land. The primary accusation is that they are no longer faithful to Yahweh, but have started to pay attention to seek the advice of, to seek the care of other gods. We hear that in the naming of Baal in the scripture. There is language that they are trying to swap out their gods, as if that possibly could happen. So it's a big accusation of apostasy. In other words, why is this happening? Because you, people of Judea, have not been faithful. Now, these words help to make some moral sense of the devastation that has faced Judah. Now, it is not that God has abandoned them. It is not that all these harsh things are happening because God has left, that God is no longer powerful, that God is no longer loving them. It is rather that they have been the ones who have abandoned God. In chapter 18, we hear that other type of prophetic utterance in which the prophet's experience becomes the parable for us. God instructs Jeremiah, go and watch a potter at a potter's wheel. And the potter there is not satisfied with what has been formed, and so smashes it and begins over again. The forming and reforming that Jeremiah observes layers onto a kind of forming and reforming of this passage and the voice in it and the telling of this event which gives life to the forming and reforming of the people that hear the story. What Jeremiah originally sees is told in the first couple of verses of the passage. I went down and saw the potter at his wheel. The vessel he was making was spoiled, so he reworked it, and that seemed good. But the seeing enables Jeremiah to hear God's voice, God asking, is it not possible that the potter can redo what the potter needs to redo? And that opens the possibility that God can change God's mind when things goes amiss. These two options may be more closely related than we think. The option of just that there's a flaw in the pot and so it needs to be reformed, or that the potter changes the potter's mind. Those two options may be actually more linked than we first think. And here, having an artist's view may help us. Artists work in concert with their medium, not in abstract. The idea of what one wants to form comes together as one thinks about what that medium actually is, what its possibilities are, what it enables. God changing one's mind is not whimsical, but very much of the part of the relationship that God has with the created, that the potter has with the clay. The clay is not completely at the mercy of the potter, but rather the clay in what it enables and the way it takes form creates part of a relationship with the created, with the Creator. So how people respond to the words that Jeremiah offers is part of the reforming as well. Now these two passages, the passage from chapter 2 and the chapter 18 passage, are samplings of the kinds of words that we're going to hear from Jeremiah. We have 2 more weeks of this series on Jeremiah's words. They offer an interpretation that gives shape to the wordless void of the trauma that Judah has experienced. And their fate is no longer seen after hearing this kind of word as cruel and random, but can be seen rather as the activity of a faithful God who has not abandoned them, but is still engaged in a loving relationship, albeit one where there's a sense of aggrievement. I've been thinking about these passages in light of the heap of troubles that surround us in our world nowadays. Environmental devastation, racism, the reworking of government to favor the rich and powerful and abandon the poor, the angry bifurcation of our political landscape. I wonder what God might say about what we have abandoned, what we have turned away from, that God would want us to attend to. And I wonder in what way God is currently reforming us for God's vision and God's purpose. To be sure, we can hold on to this much as the truth. God is in a continual relationship with us, even when God's hopes for us are frustrated. God may accuse us and be angry with us and unhappy with us and even feel betrayed by us. God may decide to reshape us in ways that feel painful to us. They may even be difficult and at times traumatizing as we are reshaped. And yet still, always, ever, and still, God holds us. God us capable of holding spirit and truth, desiring to make us capable of love and mercy. God holds us and reshapes us and stays with us.